We are very excited to be welcoming music director Marin Alsop, composer and conductor John Adams, and professor and performer of the classical saxophone Tim McAllister. Thank you all for joining us. So we're going to jump right in and have some questions from Athens, Georgia.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. My name is Michael Turner. This is Brandon Quarles and Gabe PK.
Hi.
We're all from the University of Georgia, and the first question is for Mr. Adams. Since the Sydney premiere received such a positive reception, are you considering other works for or including saxophone?
Oh, I don't know. I love the sax, and I don't at the moment have any plans. Tim can tell you I've written so many notes for him over the last couple of years that you know, he probably needs a little more time to digest them. But you know, it's a wonderful instrument, and it just has a nice personality that fits with my music.
Cool. The next question is for Dr. McAllister. How has your approach to the piece changed or developed since the Sydney premiere?
Well, you learn a lot from a first performance. You learn a lot about how you respond in that situation, and just in this case, every piece is a different organism. And for me, having a chance to even listen back to the archival recording, which we were able to hear, it just allowed me to maybe adjust my sound concept a little bit and maybe not feel so forward or pushing. And we've worked on this quite a bit, just finding the right balance for the instrument as soloist and trying to. For me, I'm actually thinking of the instrument as definitely, of course, a solo voice, but maybe more of a role of a chamber partner throughout, because the orchestra is not a giant orchestra really. And so, trying to for me, I'm trying to find more opportunities to interact with some of the solo or some of the writing for even the wind players, you know, way back behind me in the orchestra. Just sort of more interaction and thinking of the instrument as maybe a little bit more mellow and a little bit more syrupy in concepts, as opposed to this kind of brash, heroic sound throughout. I think that's how it's changed for me.
And this is for Dr. McAllister. Did you have to take a different approach in learning a piece that was so heavily influenced by jazz?
Yeah, I think especially early on, and we talked about this quite a bit. What he was going for, but I think early on I was listening to more of the kinds of recordings that influenced John in his life, and just maybe going for a more of a crossover sound or something that melds the two worlds a little bit more. Maybe something we might see with a piece like, or even the kind of saxophone sound that we sometimes associate with Gershwin's symphonic compositions. You know, that's not really a classical saxophone sound, even though it's embedded in the orchestra. So just looking at, you know, trying to turn off certain idiomatic cliches that we associate with solo writing for our instrument, just trying to be a little bit more, in some ways, static with expression and look more at architecture in line as opposed to heavy nuance on every note. We see that a lot, and so that's a big thing that I worked on.
Great, and thank you guys in Georgia. We really appreciate your questions.
Yeah, thank you.
We are going to move on to some questions from Yuri from Baltimore. This question is for Marin. Where do you think the BSO will be in 10 years?
Hopefully we'll be right here still in 10 years. I think the BSO is really at the front end of defining what the orchestra of the future will be. Not only do we continue to promote live music and performing concerts at hopefully the top level of artistic excellence, but we also understand that as a symphony orchestra we have to be integral and integrated into the community on many levels, and consequently I think several of our initiatives, our OrKids program, the after-school program for kids, started in West Baltimore. And we started with 25 kids 5 years ago, and we have 700 kids today. I think I'm hopeful that even before 10 years, we'll have 83,000 kids in the program. That's my goal. And then through our outreach to adult non-professional musicians, I hope that that will grow even further. It's huge already, and we've made such great connections to people, and really feel that we have a whole new fan base through our orchids, through our Rusty Musicians program, and hopefully we'll figure out how to connect with people who don't even have a musical background. You know, how can we get people involved in getting in touch with the incredible musicianship that we all inherently born with. So hopefully that we'll be making great music in 10 years to an even broader audience.
Great. So our next question is also from Yuri, and a lot of the next ones are from Yuri. So what is your position on live orchestral streaming? Would you be opposed to a system similar to the Berlin Philharmonic offering online subscriptions, or even the Los Angeles Philharmonic where they have streamed to movie theaters in the regional areas?
Well, certainly, I'm all for any kind of exposure. Again, it's about broadening access and inclusion for people. For me, though, I think that, you know, the Berlin Philharmonic's wonderful, but again, if you don't have a certain economic access, you can't participate in experiencing these concerts. I mean, I'd like to embed a camera in the orchestra so people could attend rehearsals and get an idea of what it's like, you know, playing in the viola section for a month or playing in the wind section for a month, and what rehearsals are like. And I'd like it all to be free to the public, frankly. I just, you know, the quality might not be anything like what the Berlin Philharmonic has or the LA Phil has, but I think access and involvement and engagement can make up for that.
Great. So what is your outlook on the current orchestral model, and how do you think it can be improved if it needs to be improved?
Well, that's a big question, huh? I think that we're going to see a lot of changes in the orchestra model as we move ahead. We've already seen a lot. I mean, just in terms of musicians understanding that the landscape has changed, and that, for example, making recordings, it used to be something where musicians could get paid, but now it's all about marketing the orchestra. It's a different kind of paradigm, and we have to rethink what we're doing. I'm seeing from musicians a much greater understanding that we need flexibility in orchestras. We need to be able to do concerts outside of the normal concert venues with different kind of makeups, you know, more chamber things. So I think we're going to see a much more flexible organism, and I think the musicians are already getting there in terms of understanding that it's not just about playing the notes on the page, no, even though that is what they are so expert at doing, but it's also about being ambassadors to the community in some other regards.
A lot of people talk about trying to make classical music more accessible to a younger generation. Do you have any plans to help make classical music more affordable for younger generations?
Yes, well, let's see. That's a 2-for-1. My plan. Well, you know, here at the Baltimore Symphony, we've launched what we call a passport program. So for $75, but you have to be 40 or under, and you have to prove it. It's probably the only time you'll get carded as a 40-year-old. But what happens is, for $75, and you have this pass, you can get tickets to any concert during the season, and just come. And can't guarantee where the seats will be, but I think this is a great idea. I mean, this idea of having membership, you know, like all of us have 10 or 20 memberships every month, and we don't even think about it. But it gives a different kind of experience, and I'm waiting for the rewards card myself. You know, I'm a member of every single rewards program, even though I never use any of the points. There's something fun about it, and so I don't know, maybe we'll base it on how many notes you hear. You know, and so for this concert you can earn 20,000 notes. Right. And I mean, tonight, hearing Tim play, it's a lot. You could earn a lot of points for all those notes, or how many notes John writes. So We'll see. I mean, I'm open to anything. The most important thing, though, is that we preserve what we do and the level of what we do. The trappings don't matter so much. What we wear, what time the concerts are played, these are unimportant things. But we have to preserve the integrity of this art form, and we have to do it at the level we're doing it at with musicians of the quality we have in Baltimore.
So the next question is for Mr. Adams. How do you feel the roles of instruments are shifting from those defined by great masterpieces of the classical canon?
I think there was, a period of explosion of technique, and that had a lot to do with the actual technology of the instruments. The move, for example, from the French horn not having any valves to being chromatic, and the same with the trumpet, and then the clarinet perfecting the key system. And when that happened, composers were able to go from writing pieces like Beethoven wrote, wonderful pieces, but still very much centered in certain key areas, to to the music of Strauss and Firebird by Stravinsky and Daphnis, which is very virtuosic, and that was a huge sea change in the sound of the orchestra and the kind of effects that we as listeners could hear. And then later on in the 20th century, after World War II, there was a lot of pushing the boundaries in terms of what we in the composition business called extended techniques, and a lot of that was experimental and didn't really get incorporated into the language, but some of it, particularly developments that composers like Ligeti and some of the European modernists developed, they sort of got absorbed into the language. Or Penderecki's string writing, where you scrape against the string and snap the string against the fingerboard, a la Bartok. In my lifetime, I've been less interested in extending instrumental techniques. For me, the exciting thing has been electronics, and I've composed, specifically for electronics, and then I've tried to incorporate them into orchestral pieces. The saxophone concerto doesn't have them, but some of my pieces have synthesizers, and have soundtracks that I've made with computer-generated sound. So I think that the orchestra will always be open to featuring these things, but when people ask me to predict, I say I can no more predict what the orchestra will sound like in 50 years than Debussy could have predicted the electric guitar. Just things that are going to happen that come about as a result of technology that since we can't imagine what they're going to be, we can't imagine what the effect on our musical life will be.
Great. So the next question is kind of a dual question for both John and Tim. And you mentioned a little bit about extended techniques. So what do you think the saxophone's place in today's genre would be? And if you could comment if there are any extended techniques for the saxophone in the concerto and what people should expect.
Well, I hope the saxophone remains an outlaw. It's more thrilling that way. I mean, this is just such a treat to sit in the audience and hear a half hour of solo saxophone with orchestra behind it, and particularly such a wonderful orchestra as the Baltimore Symphony. And there are not a lot of saxophone concertos, and I was thinking back. I mean, I think I've only once in my life heard a work for saxophone and orchestra, and that was a minor piece by Debussy, a Rhapsody. And I don't know whether it naturally fits in the orchestra or whether it's always going to have sort of an anecdotal quality to it, that when the listener hears it, it's thinking, oh, saxophone, jazz, blues, whatever. I mean, I've used the saxophone. It's a huge part for a sax quartet in my opera Nixon in China, and I wrote another piece that Marin played on her first season as music director, Fearful Symmetries, and I love the sound. But I do think it's special, and it does have certain problems integrating with the orchestra, but maybe that's just a subjective thing. Maybe we're so used to hearing the classics and Brahms and Mahler, and that when we hear the saxophone, we think that it's, you know, there's something unusual and slightly outre about it.
Yeah. And Tim, if you would like to follow up on what it's like to play this type of concerto, and what you think the role of the saxophone will be in the future.
Well, it's very thrilling, I mean, to do this. I mean, this has just been a dream to work with both of them. But you know, as speaking for the saxophone community, I think we gave up a long time ago on being like some kind of permanent member of a symphony orchestra. I mean, you know, but we also recognize that if we talk about the orchestral top 40, and there is kind of like an orchestral top 40, you know, there are a good number of pieces that have saxophone in them, and I think our community has really tried to further the level of playing that a conductor would come in contact with, or the level that a composer would come in contact with, so that they are interested or invested in this instrument this way. And we have seen that. I mean, we have seen that change. But at the same time, that's not going to lead to any kind of permanent addition to the orchestra. But we'd like to say that we're closer. We're closer in at least fitting in, and we have a better sense in this time compared to 100 years ago. We have better equipment. We have a better sense of, or at least in the training, we have a better sense of intonation, or at least the attempt, and we have a better sense of blend and what that means. One of my great challenges and one of the most exhilarating challenges of my career has been playing John City Noir, because you are a chameleon the entire time. Because one moment you're part of a woodwind choir, and you really need to understand blend and balance. Next moment you have to channel Eric Dolphy. The next moment you have to channel Bernstein, and that's very different. And the next moment you have to channel like smooth, like the sound of film music, and that is actually very exhilarating. And actually it takes a technical ability to be able to do that, and some kind of training to at least have those discussions. To bring that into training is important for us as young players, or for young players, and for us as teachers.
I just wanted to say one thing about the fact that the orchestra is such a kind of fixed model. That it has 3 flutes, 3 oboes, 3 English horn, clarinet, etc., and rarely has 4 saxophones, or 6 buccini, which you have in Pines of Rome, and that's economic. That orchestras are very, very expensive institutions to maintain in communities, and because the great literature is largely confined to those instruments, of course in the case of Mahler they're all kind of blown up, but it's still basically the same instruments, that if a composer comes along and writes a piece that's for, I'll take for example Louis Andriesen's music, which is music that I love, which is very rarely heard in this country, because it will be for, I'm imagining this, but it's something similar to, like, he might have 16 double basses and 8 celli, but no violins, and 2 bass guitars and 5 oboes, but no flutes, etc. What I'm getting at is that the economics of producing a piece like that become a burden, a really serious burden on an orchestra, and that's why the orchestras actually tended to stay the same over time, and even a composer like me, who really likes to push the boundaries of orchestration, I realize when I'm writing a piece for the Baltimore Symphony or for the San Francisco Symphony that there's a limit to how much new I can add into it.
Well, we're very fortunate that you you bought into that amount of new. We appreciate it. I'm sure Tim appreciates it.
Yeah, absolutely.
The thing I remember though is the first time I heard saxophone in the orchestra, and what an incredible sound I thought it was. It was Prokofiev's Romeo and Juliet, and I like the fact that it still remains somewhat of an exotic novelty in the orchestra. So while I enjoy having saxophone either as soloist or incorporate into the texture, I think overuse would make it become somewhat expected. So you're a specialty item.
Like on the old Tonight Show, you just heard
That's
it
right.
all the time. Yeah.
True.
All right, great. So now we're going to move to Scott in College Park, Maryland.
Hello, everybody. It's great
Hi.
to talk to you all. My name is Scott O'Coin. I'm a composition major at the University of Maryland, and my question is for Mr. Adams. So we touched upon the fact that saxophone is a very, special instrument, and this kind of dark horse. But what's been your favorite thing about writing for it as a solo instrument?
Well, I think that first of all, it just has a very special sound, and I grew up listening to it. My father played it, and I was introduced to jazz at a very young age, and some of my favorite music was written for saxophone, mostly Duke Ellington, but also Stan Getz and Charlie Parker and Eric Dolphy and on and on. I love its athletic nimbleness. It's just an instrument that just, it's kind of the acrobat, of the instrumental family. I would think only maybe the flute and the clarinet have that kind of ability to just jump effortlessly from one octave to another. I like the fact that it can be funky, that it can be edgy, raunchy, and then it can be amazingly tender and sweet. And I think I've used all of those qualities in the concerto. The concerto starts very, very like high energy. It's like 6 cups of espresso, right like that at the beginning. But then, within a few minutes, it moves into a much dreamier and more lyrical state, and then winds down into a slow movement that's very much influenced by kind of lazy jazz that you'd hear, let's say, circa 1960, 65. And then the last movement is this really hard-driven bop-influenced piece. And so I think, I haven't explored all the expressive potentials of the saxophone in this concerto, but I think I've plundered many of its best potential.
And just a thing about process, did you face any challenges when writing this new work?
Well, every piece presents challenges. I mean, for me, starting a piece is always
A challenge.
it's hellacious. It's always difficult. You think, oh, I'd love to write a sax concerto, and then you sit down your first day and you think, what am I doing? I don't really have any ideas. And then, you write something and you think, is that the best I can do? I can't believe it. I'm at the end of my career. This has always been the case. And then the day comes where you just realize you just have to go with something. And fortunately, I've learned over the years that I can always go back and change the beginning if turns out I didn't like it. But usually it's very biological. It's like watching, cells grow in a Petri dish. You start with a little idea, it's a little cell, and then you build on it. And in this piece, what really generated the ideas was a series of modal scales, which I was playing with, and they're very, very obvious. From the minute it starts, the orchestra starts playing these scales that are, clusters of pitches that are in one mode, and then the next time it goes up and it's a different mode, and the next time it goes up it's in a different mode, and this saxophone improvises, or doesn't improvise, but it embellishes on these modes, and that became a really exciting, generating thing, and the piece, in a way, is entirely conceived that way. So, in a sense, I compose like a jazz improviser. You know, I find a harmonic language for the piece. I find a kind of gene pool, and then, in a sense, my composing is sort of very slow motion improvising.
Thank you so much, and good luck tonight, everybody.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. And now we have Nora from Danville, PA.
Hi, I'm Nora.
Hi, Nora.
I'm a singer from Danville, Pennsylvania. Thank you so much for having me join you. My first question is for John. This is kind of something that you guys have been touching on. But, of course, solo saxophones have been traditionally associated with jazz music. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how jazz music has influenced your saxophone compositions.
Well, I think I just mentioned, you know, the way in which I conceive melody. It's very much based on a harmonic, let's say, not so much harmonic chord changes, but I'd say a field. You know, like they talk about in physics. It's like I'll have a field, an area that's in a certain harmony, and then the process of creating the structures and the melodies is very much. It's very much like a jazz player improvising, or for that matter, like an Indian sitar player improvising on a raga. I think that that's really one of the essential things about tonal music. You know, I think that jazz it's influenced me so much because, first of all, there's just something about the feel of jazz that, you know, the rhythmic world. It's got rigor, and yet at the same time, it's supple and it swings. And you know, while my desert island music, of course, has to be Beethoven, but it also is Duke Ellington, because while I love Beethoven, there is something about the squareness of the rhythm, which, you know, I need, but I also need the swing. And you know, maybe that's because I'm an American. I'm watching you conducting in the last movement, and I see Marin's body just start to move, because you know, she's just drawn into the pulse of it. And you know, I don't want to get too nationalistic here, but I really do think it's an American thing. It's influenced me deeply, and probably part of it is, you know, I grew up during the 60s, so I was very, very aware of John Coltrane and Pharoah Sanders and Miles Davis, and it's become a part of my language.
And I thought of a follow-up question then for Tim also is, how do you approach your playing of the music, knowing that there is this jazz influence? Do you incorporate, you know, a jazz technique, or is it, you know, a blend of your classical and jazz technique, or how do you approach that?
Well, some of it's just in our DNA as saxophone players. I mean, it's almost inseparable from the sonority of the instrument itself, and so we either play into that, maybe some of the natural tendencies of the instrument, or if maybe we're playing in a very, very strict kind of classical paradigm, we might kind of rope all of that in, you know, in some ways, like really kind of making the instrument behave a certain way. And so in my case, I grew up, for me, I chose the saxophone not because of Bizet and Rachmaninoff, even though I fell in love with that. It was because of hearing great jazz musicians and the iconic figures. And so I was exposed to that early on. I heard Nixon in China when I was.
Don't tell me.
Okay, I won't tell you. Okay.
I know, it's scary, isn't it?
I was a teenager. Okay, I'll say that. But I mean, you know, and I tell him all the time. My high school private saxophone teacher premiered Nixon in China. And so I knew about contemporary music, and I knew about living composers pretty early. It was built into just who we were as saxophone players. I mean, in some ways, we know we missed Brahms, and we know we even missed Bernstein. There was a chance in Copland. There was a chance to get a piece, there's it's a story for a different time. But we've all so aggressively jumped on the bandwagon of working with living composers and commissions and whatnot. But at the heart of kind of why we all end up eventually, really from the very beginning, getting into the saxophone is jazz, and so it was part of my training early on. And I don't think there have been times where I've tried to maybe more literally channel some jazz style, but then it probably does cross out of something being appropriate in places, even in this piece. So it's about tempering it and finding a middle ground, and that's really hard. I mean, I think that's been the #1 challenge for me as a player. How do I straddle the line and not be too square and not be so overt that it's a little bit campy? That's possible to try to sound too jazzy. It's possible. And then if you go that far, it does, it's really, I don't know, it becomes a caricature. And that's an amazing challenge. We've seen that in some other pieces before. I mean, it can happen in West Side Story. If you go too far in West Side Story, you've corrupted that pit orchestra sound that Bernstein, all you have to do is listen to the original recordings and realize just how far the players were to take that, and there was kind of a pit sound or a Broadway sound, and so you can go too far. And but I don't think, had I not had any jazz training at all, I think I would have been cut off from what he's bringing to the piece, and it certainly was the case with the previous piece, City Noir. I mean, if I was someone that had zero jazz background at all, and I don't really call myself a jazz musician, but I think of myself as someone heavily influenced by that pedagogy and just the great icons of my instrument. But it's been a challenge figuring out exactly where to fit.
Thank you. My next question is for Marin, and my question is, contemporary music presents some new challenges for conductors as well as the musicians, as we've been discussing. So can you talk a bit about some of the new challenges you've encountered in working on a piece like this concerto, and how you approach this concerto?
Well, of course, it's always important to remember that Beethoven was contemporary music once. So there are different challenges for each piece that one experiences. In the case of this concerto, I think I don't know if I've done work, John, that you've written so early in the game. So this is a little bit of a new experience, although I've done an enormous number of works that John has written, probably everything that I could get my hands on. And so I haven't experienced the type of revisions and tweaking process that John goes through. I don't know if you go through this process with every piece.
You mean running up on the stage and with a bunch of sticky
notes and yes,
putting them on the oboe.
Well, and the idea that, I don't know if we can share that, but it's too late because I'm going to share this. But that John decided to rewrite a small section of the piece, and then he heard it and he realized I like what I did first. So then we had to go back to that.
No, I didn't say that. I said I really didn't like what I did second.
Right, well, okay, I guess that is an important difference and distinction. So, we've tried to adjust on the spot and change things. And also, I think, especially with the concerto, there are a lot of balance issues where you want to change things, and you realize, okay, we have to recess the orchestra more here, so we have to change a lot of dynamic changes, I would say, and
finding wrong notes.
Yeah, wrong notes. To be honest,
even a score that's been what I consider fastidiously proofread, it still has wrong notes in them. They're transpositions, and we hear Marin will do a passage a couple of times, and we're both thinking the same thing, which is, oh, the player made a mistake.
Right, in reading, maybe
but then she notices, each time it was exactly at the same chord, so she has to go back and very slowly play through the passage, and we find wrong notes. Of course, I recently did I think it was Création du Monde, which is like almost 100 years old, and it still has wrong notes in it. So,
it's true.
But it's wonderful to work with Marin because she's so experienced dealing with composers and very patient. Some conductors they're so turf conscious about the podium and their control, and they get very anxious if a composer comes and tries to make a comment or a change or something like that. But Marin is so relaxed, and she creates an atmosphere of it's a wonderful atmosphere of creativity. So the orchestra, instead of being irritable or annoyed or impatient, understand that this is a creative process, and the work is still in a state of becoming, and so it becomes, I think, exciting and a pleasure for everybody. And I can tell you that's not always the case. Sometimes as a composer, you're sitting there wondering, well, can I interrupt the conductor now, or will he bark at me?
It's delicate though. I mean, and specifically in this piece, I would say there's a challenge. What John and I were talking about it earlier today, because it has this jazz component. The musicians who are classically trained in the orchestra, they also have to let go a little bit of their classical framework. So, especially in the second movement, rather than play every note perfectly, exactly where it's supposed to go, you have to go more for the swing of it. And that's hard sometimes to get, like, you don't have to play all the notes so well. You can ghost some of the notes, and this kind of experience. So it brings a lot of, and of course I used to have a swing band, so that's something that interests me in how you translate those ideas to classical musicians, because we were all from Juilliard. We didn't know a thing about playing swing music when we started. So I approach it from a very different perspective. It's very hard.
It's particularly hard if you're a conductor, because you're used to, the downbeats here. And the first time I worked with a swing band, it was really hard for me because I realized that
the downbeat's there and over there.
And you end up not conducting. You end up snapping your fingers on the offbeat because that's the only way you can.
But just to even, start by listening to the metronome and counting, so that it's on 2 and 4. I used to practice Bach with the metronome on 2 and 4 because it gives you a completely different perspective and a different feel. And I think for this piece, those kind of experiences really help me a lot. But it's a joy to work with both John and Tim. And I've worked with Tim many times in the orchestra, but now he's out of the orchestra. He's behaving very well so far. Thank you so much for your questions. It's great.
Thank you, Nora.
Thank you.
And now, Marin, we're nearing the end of our hangout, but I wanted to read you a lovely note that we got from Julianne in Miami, Florida. She said, Marin, I had the honor of singing under your baton at Carnegie Hall last year while studying at Peabody, and I was moved by your presence and performance at the proms. Your message is one of empowerment and progress, and your talent is unmatched. As a native Baltimorean and a female musician, I am so very proud to call you our maestra. I am now a graduate student at the Frost School of Music at the University of Miami. With the help of several professors and musical professionals in the area, we are trying to develop a student-based program to foster a new generation of classical music audiences and industry professionals. What do you perceive as the biggest obstacle facing classical music in terms of marketability to millennials, both as potential performers and listeners? It's a big question.
Easy question to end our hangout. It really belies the term hangout, doesn't it? I think, again, it's all about perception, isn't it? Because when one goes to Venezuela, where the El Sistema program has swept the country now for 40 years, as a classical musician and as a successful classical musician, one is looked at as a rock star. So maybe the idea is all about this perception and how we got. Maybe we don't have to worry so much about how we got to this strange place of being marginalized. And I really was despairing when I realized that 7-Eleven played classical music to deter loitering among teenagers. I realized, this is really going to be an uphill battle. But I think through programs like ORCIDS and exposure at a really early age and access and inclusion, we have the possibility to create that same kind of environment where classical music and classical musicians are embraced by younger generations. But I do think the idea of creating a program for young musicians so that they have skills beyond just playing their instruments, being able to teach, being able to interact, being able to play in a nightclub, being able to play some jazz, crossing over, being able to do public speaking, to be ambassadors for the art form. I think that's an extremely worthwhile program that you're involved in, and I applaud you for doing that. So keep up that good work. And I don't know, do you guys have any thoughts about that?
I think that's very eloquently put.
It's I mean, if people don't have access, they can't understand.
Yeah, I mean, we also live in a society where pop culture is given way too much prestige. I mean, I think, everybody enjoys pop culture, enjoys the movies and television and pop music, but it's become kind of required of you to embrace it. And classical music, along with great literature and poetry and painting, all the arts have somehow become not so much suspect, but they've become marginalized in a lot of areas of American activity. Classical music has become this thing that has sort of the aroma or the odor of old people, and age and seriousness, and it isn't hip, and it's very sad, because I mean, I have to confess that when I heard Scheherazade was on this program, I kind of rolled my eyeballs and thought, oh no, not that old war horse. But sitting in the hall today and listening to it being rehearsed, I realized what a thrill it was, and there's just a certain kind of passion and sensuality, in addition to all the intellectual pleasures that you just can't get with a
3-minute pop tune.
Even the best pop music. It isn't that it's better; it's different. And the problem in this country is that a lot of people grow up fearing that classical music is going to, it's going to make them be uncool. And as Marin said, if you go to a very poor country like Venezuela, where classical music has been presented as an exciting thing, young people think it's really cool there.
Great, thank you. And as you can tell, the people who are attending our Hangout right now obviously also think that it's pretty cool.
Yes. And they look pretty hip, so I don't know.
So I want to thank everyone for contributing today, or this evening, and I also want to thank everyone online who is not participating but watched us. We really appreciate your engagement. And especially for those people, if you'd like to see the performance of John Adams' Saxophone Concerto this weekend, you can find more information at www.bsomusic.org and their performances through Sunday. And thank you all again. We really appreciate it. Have a good night.
Everybody.
Bye-bye.
Nice to meet you all.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Thank you.